Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Today y Mañana. I'm Alex. This is Xavier. We're really excited to have you joining us on a chilly morning here in Charlottesville. So grab your café con leche, sit down, they're ready for today's show. We have a really inspirational show for you today. We're going to be joined later in the show by Sheila Lenihan Jordan, owner of Prosper Parenting, as well as Debbie Shoemaker Berkeley of ADAptable Acceptance. And that's going to be a fantastic little roundtable that we're going to have later on in the show. And Xavier and I have a little topic we'll get to at the beginning, as usual. As always, we're presented by Emergent Financial Services. We are powered by Cristel Noel State Farm Agency, by Vitae Spirits, by GBS Financial Services, and by CVille Picnic. And we are always partnering with Forward Adelante, the premier Latino networking group here in Charlottesville, Virginia. And so, Xavier, I know there's so much going on in the markets, in the economy, that's really, I guess, hitting home now in terms of you go to the store. I mean, sometimes you're seeing empty shelves. Sometimes you're seeing the things that used to be not so expensive are now much more expensive than they were before. So what are some of the things you're seeing that you wanted to talk about today?
People always, historically, people always say that the bond market dictates or sees things before everybody else, meaning the stock market, et cetera, right? So recently I've seen trends in the bond market that are beginning to, raise my eyebrows and say, what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is it telling us? And by that I mean, historically, for example, when the expectation is that the Fed is going to raise rates, they don't even have to do it. Most of the time, the bond market, all rates, meaning the 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, 10-year, 30-year bonds, they all start to go up in rates, right? So it kind of like it preempts the fact that they're going to do this, right? And then typically, if you think that inflation is an issue and the Fed's going to come in and raise rates, then what happens is the short-term rates go up because they're going to raise rates, but long-term rates begin to come down, right? Because they say if they're going to fight inflation, then long-term is not going to be an issue. Mm-hmm. Short-term, they're going to raise rates, so that's going to be an issue. But something's happened recently. So, and remember, the Fed already said that in starting November, they're going to reduce their taper. They're going to start tapering, meaning they're not going to buy as many bonds. We're buying $120 billion of bonds every single month. So they're going to buy less, right? They haven't done anything yet, but the bond market already reacted to that. So if you take a look at September, right, and even early October, every time the rates went up, they went up in tandem. And what I mean by that, in other words, if the 30-year went up by 10 basis points and the 2-year went up maybe by 1 or 2 basis points, it's never the same, right? But they go up at the same time, or they went down at the same time. Maybe not 100% of the time, but maybe like 90, 95% of the time. Since October 8th, it's been a complete reversal, right? All of a sudden, that correlation is now negative. In other words, the 2-year has been going down in rates, and the 30 has been going up in rates. So what is that telling us, right?
Which is the opposite of what we would expect, basically.
Well, it's opposite of what we've been seeing, right? And it's opposite of what you expect in this. Well, it's not opposite of what you expect. Because if you really truly think that the Fed is going to begin to raise rates in 2022, then the short end of the curve, meaning 3 months, 6 months, 2-year, 3-year, are the ones that are going to go up, right? Because that's where they impact the most. So why are they going down? And I think the reason is that people are beginning to, or the markets are beginning to get a feeling that inflation is here to stay. And if it's here to stay for an extended period of time, and again, does that mean 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? We don't really know, right? But the feeling is it's here for a longer period. In other words, this concept of transitory is going to be a long transitory period, right?
So, if the 10-year and the 30-year rates are going up, that's long-term thinking. That's not short-term thinking.
Exactly. So it's saying it's here, and two, what it's telling us, right? If the 2-year is starting to go down in yield, it's telling us that most people are now beginning to feel like the Fed is not going to lower rates next year, right? And why? If you think about it, we have a situation where the economy is still not going as well as we had expected coming into this year. The global economies aren't doing well. So we have all this inflation going on in our systems, which typically meant that economies were overheating, and therefore you had to begin to slow them down somehow, right? That's not the case here. And I think everybody, including the Fed, especially the market, says, no, that's not what's happening here.
There's no way this is overheating.
Exactly. So the feeling is the Fed's not going to raise rates next year. They may taper either way. We'll see in November how much they taper. They may taper either way. But the Fed is saying we can't raise rates in a situation where the economy is not doing well because we're going to choke off any recovery, and that's going to be worse, right? And two, you know and I know that the Fed is saying a little inflation, what's the big deal, right? In other words, we want inflation to be an average of 2%, 2.5% over longer periods of time. It's been so low that even if we're at 6% for a year, the average is good, right? In other words, for them, higher inflation means that their debt, right, is worth less. They're buying all this debt. They basically know that the U.S. government is producing all this debt. Therefore, that's good for the U.S. government, and that's good for the Fed. But it's not good for everybody else. I mean, I can't think of anybody that if you ask them, are you happy with 6% inflation because everything is going up in price? Are you happy with that?
I mean, I guess if you owe a lot of money, you're happy with it. But
yeah, but even then, I mean, everything you are now buying costs more. So you got to pay that debt. How? You still got to come up with the money. It's
you
different
just know
with
that
governments.
The money you're giving is going to be worth a lot less.
Exactly. So I think that from that perspective, the market is saying things have changed. Starting this year, you and I had this conversation. Starting this year, some people ask us, what did you think? What was the probability of a recession starting next year, meaning 2022? And we said it's less than 10%, right? In other words, you're coming out of a pandemic. They shut down the economy, right?
It can only go up
and so
from there.
the economy can only go up. I mean, you can't stay at the levels we were at before. So the economy can only go up, right? So we said there's just no way that can happen. But here we are, literally 8 months into this year, and now
10.
you and I, and the whole, I mean, I know that at Emergent Financial, we've had the conversation about recession, which we didn't have that conversation at the beginning of the year. We have the conversation saying we are now getting closer to the probability that if things don't get any better, we may see a recession.
You're now at the place where it's beginning to trickle down. In other words, you have inflation, you have supply chain issues at the beginning of the year. If they're temporary, people don't really change their behavior. You're unhappy about it, right? You go to the store, the milk is more expensive, the bread's more expensive, I go to Lowe's, the wood's more expensive. You're not happy about it, but you're not necessarily changing your behavior if you think it's temporary.
That's right.
Right? The longer it goes on, now you start to begin, this is what I talked about with Jerry on the show the other day, now you begin to change your behavior, because now you sit there and say, well, if those Christmas sniffs are going to be more expensive in 2 months, I'm going to buy them now.
That's right.
If everybody does the same thing, what happens to the price of the gifts now? Goes
exactly.
Up. If you think bread is going to be more expensive tomorrow, everybody goes and buys bread today. What happens to the price of bread today?
It goes up.
It goes up. So now you're beginning to change your behavior. Now you're sitting there saying, well, because I know my normal living expenses, maybe my rent, my food, my gas is going to be more expensive for the next 6 months. I don't think I'm going to buy that new fridge that I was thinking of getting. I probably won't try to get a new car, even if I could, because the car prices have gone up because of the microchip shortage. Right? Maybe I'm not going to buy that, replace that air conditioning unit. I won't replace that. I won't fix that. Because you're sitting there saying, all my day-to-day expenses are now higher, and I don't see it changing. And the fact that the bond market is behaving as it does means a lot of people are saying, I don't see this changing. In other words, we can hear it's temporary all day long, but if you stop believing that it's temporary, you now change your behavior. And I think we're now seeing, in the past couple months, we have seen consumer confidence decline. Like I told Jerry, when your economy is 70% consumer spending, you don't want to see consumer confidence decline.
And you can see the consumer is confused, right? In other words, when you live in a situation where, like I said, the economy is booming and inflation is hitting, you recognize and you say, okay, so yes, you know what, I'll buy some more things on, but then I wait. Here it's like, well, are things going to get better in 6 months? Is this really temporary? We know that the supply chain is broken, right? Is it broken? Is it going to stay broken? Is it going to get fixed? How is it going to get fixed? How quickly is it going to get fixed? I mean, we hear, pundits in television tell us that inflation is here because demand is so high. Well, I say, well, wait a minute. And this is another topic we want to talk about. We have all these tankers, like 67 tankers sitting in Los Angeles, not being processed. If demand was so high, I'd be pushing those tankers through as quickly as possible to get all that inventory in, all those capital goods in, but they're not. So it's something else, right? And that's the issue. It's not just the fact that
plus it's difficult to say demand is too high when we're not even back to 100% of where we were pre-pandemic levels.
Exactly.
So, I mean, your pandemic drops you, right, because you shut down. So you drop, what we have, minus 30% quarters, minus another, I think we had a minus 30 and a minus 40 last year.
Right.
We haven't had recovery this year such that we're back to 100%. We're still sitting at 90-something% of where we were before.
Right.
And I don't recall
No.
shipping containers and 6% inflation in January, February of 2020.
No.
So we're not, so it can't be an overheating issue. It means if the demand is not back to where it was, but we're having this type of issue, what that means is you've got a supply issue. You have, not that you have too many people seeking goods. You have less people seeking goods than we had in February of 2020, but it means you have less goods.
Exactly.
You have, and you see that in shortages of cars. When you see shortages of this nature, that means the supply is unable to ramp up and keep. Because you put it this way, right? Car companies are not going to be are not happy about sitting there saying, "Oh, there's so much demand for my cars. I don't feel like making any more cars today." They're sitting there saying, "I cannot make the cars. You can't finish the product. I cannot finish the product because I cannot get the semiconductor chip." Because I'm getting them from Taiwan Semiconductor, and there's not enough coming out of there.
Yeah. Or they're sitting in the.
Or they're on the ship. They're on the tanker,
exactly.
And I can't get a hold of them because they haven't yet been transferred onto the trucks that will bring them to my facility where I make the cars. And so that's where you see these issues begin to pile up. Because the issue is, is not that. Because if it was purely a demand issue, typically what happens is, yes, price will go up temporarily. But then suppliers come in.
Sure.
People are smart. Someone goes in and says, bread's really expensive. I want in on this bread game.
Exactly.
I'll make some bread and start selling it. And then the price comes back down because now there's more bread. But if no one's doing that, that's telling you something is keeping the bread guy saying, I really can't afford to go into this bread game because I can't find what I need to make bread.
Because inventory is being depleted and nobody's refilling those shelves. And therefore you can sell it at whatever price you want, right? If you got that last bottle of, iced tea on the shelf, I'm sure that store could sell it for like $5, $6, $7 because they say, wait a minute, we're going to bid this thing now, right? Because like it's the last bottle and that's what's happening.
And like I told Jerry, right, we tend to think, we instantly go when prices go up to, price gouging, right? And which I'm not saying doesn't happen in natural disasters and stuff, but price is merely a mechanism that's telling us information.
Right.
So price going up is what prevents us from having shortages. Because if the price stays the same and you got too many people want something, there's not enough of it, sooner or later you just flat out run out of it.
Exactly.
As price goes up, some people tail off and say, I don't want that anymore, that price, and so you equalize. Like the point, price on the little economic spectrum is the point at which supply and demand meet.
That's right.
It's there to sort of make an equilibrium so that the number of people who want something equals the number of things that there are. And so when there's not enough things to buy, price goes up, some people tail off and say, at that price, I'll wait, right? And then before you know it, now you have the same number of people. So price going up just means that's the market's way of telling us there's not enough of something. And if you try to force this price down, all you're going to end up is that there will be too many people who want it and you'll have the empty shelf. So the price is telling us when prices go up like this, it's saying that there's not enough of something that people want.
Exactly.
Right? And if you can't, and obviously we know that on the demand side, the issue is not that there's too many people wanting things, because we don't want more things than we wanted 13 months ago.
No.
15 months ago. It means that there's less things than there were 15 months ago.
The other issue also is that, we certainly have a lot of stimulus, right? So when you have that kind of stimulus from the government, there's a lot of money left over, and people will say, I've got money left over, let me go buy, right? So there is the demand, but the supply side is really where it's being pressured, where the issues are. And it's just a little interesting, just because, we also talked a little bit about, the process that this country has gone through, right? From the perspective of manufacturing. And to a certain respect, it almost started back in the 1970s when you had they created the containers, right? Those steel
the big shipping containers that you see on the boats.
Right? which basically they made them to a particular standard size. And it's the standard size that you can then also take out of a ship. You can stack them on a ship. You can take them out of a ship and put them into a bed, into the back of a truck, right? So it made really transportation a lot cheaper, right? The cost of transportation was down. You can ship a lot more on a particular tanker than you could before, right? And the movement of these particular products were shortened as far as time was concerned. So what happened, if you are a manufacturing company in the US and say, wait a minute, I now can get a product from this country that's cheaper, a product from another country that's cheaper, right? I don't have to have warehouses here where I just buy everything in one shot, sit it in, and have it sit in a warehouse, and when I need it, I use it. And if there's a recession, I'm sitting there with product that I can't use, and I'm paying for that, right? So it changed the whole production cycle, so that essentially you went from having a lot of inventory just in case you need it to basically a just-in-time inventory where, okay, next month we're going to build 600 cars. We need 600 of this part. We need 600 of that part. Let's bring it in, and then just a week before you need it, they get there, right?
Exactly.
So think about that. I mean, our whole manufacturer system was shipped outside of this country in piecemeal, because it wasn't a problem, right?
Well, it was an issue, and plus it's one of the ways, right? Companies improved their profit,
of course,
from the 1970s to now, not necessarily by making better products or new innovations. They improved it by making their supply line really lean. So in other words, I'm not going to waste anything. I'm going to buy just as many semiconductor chips as I need. I'm going to buy just as many nails as I need. I'm going to buy just as many screws I need. I'm not going to buy any extras, because this saves me money, and I know that if I need one, I just order it and it pops up in time.
And you can buy the screws from one country, the nails from another country, the chips from a third country.
Exactly. You do not ever, and it always arrives just in time.
Exactly.
And you're not spending any extra money, so your cost has come down because it's so lean. But the price of doing that, of course, is when something goes wrong.
All you need is one thing to go wrong.
All you need is one thing to go wrong, and suddenly, I can't get the semiconductor. You mean the semiconductor chips don't arrive for 2 months instead of a week? I don't have any extras because I was so lean.
And I can't go. And I can't go here. It's like who? Let me see
exactly.
Let me call who's making
them.
Nobody.
Nobody. They're all out of business now. And so before you know it, now suddenly the companies can't produce the product. They can't even make what they were going to make because they made themselves such lean, efficient machines that now suddenly you're more susceptible, because any kind of supply shock means you have no inventory left over, and now you can't even produce the product you were making. I mean, we know someone who's been waiting 2 months now for a Ford truck.
Wow.
And he said it's 2 months. Like, he's willing to pay for this truck. It's not even a price issue. He's like, I need this truck for work.
Yes.
And you're just telling me you flat out don't have it.
Don't have it.
Because then what are they waiting on? They're waiting on a semiconductor chip. They have the other things they need, but the semiconductor chip apparently is not made in the United States. So they need it probably from Taiwan Semiconductor, which is the big maker in the world. And as we know, Taiwan's having their own issues right now. Yes. And their priority is probably not, let me get these semiconductor chips out to Ford.
Exactly.
Right. So you sit there and say, you made yourself, yes. Did it bring you a lot of profit when times were good? Because suddenly you weren't paying for a single nail that you didn't need? Yes. But now, the price of doing that, the price of the super lean global supply chain, is that if something happens to any piece of that, and you can extrapolate this even beyond pandemics. I mean, you could have a natural disaster.
Of course.
In Japan or in Taiwan. You could have something that happens, a war in the Middle East or something, or in Africa. And suddenly all these places where you were getting these natural resources from and getting them at the last minute because you could, and you could pay really cheap for them, suddenly now you don't have them and you can't even make the product.
No, and you look at Japan's having the same problems we have, right? Mm-hmm. Europe is a little less problematic because they have enough trading amongst each other, and there isn't, obviously, the issue is not so much shipping and across, right? So they haven't seen
there's no ocean between Europe and a lot of the places where...
So, and they haven't seen the kind of inflation we've seen here, right? Mm-hmm. But let's be honest. I mean, it's just, there's so many little things going on right now that are impacting the inflationary outlook, that I think the markets, the consumer, and everybody's saying, I don't think this is a problem that's going to be solved overnight. I think this is a problem for whatever reason right, is going to stay with us, right?
For a while.
Because there aren't enough people out there, smart people, that try to figure out what's going on and why. And some of the problems are not problems that can be solved overnight either way. I mean, we saw that with the medicines last year, right? In other words, we turned around, it's like, well, we get all our medicine, 90% of our medicine from China. That's not necessarily good, because if they say, well, we can't ship it to you because we need it, where do we make our medicines? So we have to take a step
open
back.
Up new factories
No,
in 2 minutes.
no.
Oh, China can't send us this. Let's open a factory and make it here in 2 weeks. It doesn't work that way.
So we need to take a step back as a country and say, we need to be able to produce especially important products for the livelihood for our citizens. We have to make sure that we can do that, right?
Exactly. Well, like I said the other day on Jerry's show, I mean, there are certain countries that are always going to be better at making certain things.
Of course.
Italy and olive oil, right? You're always going to want to buy your olive oil from Italy.
But that's not an emergency.
But it's not an emergency. There are certain things, medicines, semiconductors, chips, things that run almost everything. Like Jerry said, you think you can go through life without a semiconductor chip.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Yeah. Your phone, even if you cut out your phone, your computer, everything, your air conditioning unit in your house, everything, the moment you get in that car and put the key in, unless you're driving a 30-year-old truck, the moment you put that key in, there's a computer inside that car.
That's why I love 60s cars. You walk in there, there's nothing in there other than everything's mechanical. You love it.
Now you open the hood on your car and
it's like,
why is there a motherboard in my car?
Exactly.
The person says, well, the motherboard's not working, so nothing works in this car. And I'm like, how can that be? Nothing works in this car? I thought you just turned the key in it.
Absolutely. One little thing goes wrong and you can't do anything.
And you can't do anything.
It just shuts the whole car down.
It shuts the whole thing
down.
At
least in the old days, you could do something. You could put scotch tape, or duct tape somewhere, and it'll work.
Exactly.
Now it's like...
You can't put a piece of gum on the motherboard.
No.
And be like, look, now it's working again.
Exactly.
The computer's working. I put some gum. So it's just so much that goes into it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that you have to be aware of. And unfortunately, what it's doing is, like I said, you hear the word transitory so many times, it ceases to be transitory. It's like, transitory after a month. And then, you're like 10 months in, it's like transitory. I'm like, transitory doesn't mean what it used to mean.
No,
it used
exactly.
to mean like short term, and now we're...
If you, and of course I listen to the Federal Times, it's part of my job, right? But the first time they said transitory, then the second time they said, well, we have to define transitory. The third time they said transitory, but they never even defined the second time, right? So it's like, well, what was the definition? Now they're saying transitory, but we have to think about the averages. Hello, now we understand, right?
What's this basic math, right? If you want to say that, if you're sitting there saying, I want inflation to be 2% over a period of time, and right now it's 6. Well, if your period of time is 1 year, you're like, we're way higher than 2. If your period of time is 2 years and the other year was 0, now you're at 3 average. Oh, that's not so bad. If you define like your period of time is 10 years and rates were 0 for 8 out of the 10 years, and then it's well under 2.
Absolutely.
We're fine. This is great. Like, it all depends on your math. It's like the constant, there's the old, I don't think I've told it on the show, the economics joke, where the president, you can name it to be any president, has in his room like a scientist, an accountant, and an economist. And he asked them what GDP is, like what the growth of the country is, the economy. And the scientist says, well, it's this and that, poof, this is your answer. You add it all up, here's your answer. And then the accountant is like, well, you should change this around a little bit, and it might be a little less than this number, and if you count it like this, you might do a little higher, right? And then the economist goes, he looks around, he makes sure no one's listening, he closes all the shades, and he leans into the president and he goes, what do you want it to be? Because with economics, you can just change it around and get the number you want. So the Fed is kind of playing this kind of game where they're saying inflation is at 6. We claimed we wanted it to be 2. So we're clearly higher than that now. But over a period of time, which we shall not define, we're good.
Yeah.
And this is where we want it.
The thing you have to worry about is runaway inflation, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, an inflation where they just, at the end, don't have any control over, right?
And that's the issue, right? If you wait too long, it becomes more difficult because there's a lag effect. In other words, the Federal Reserve raises rates now to combat inflation. That really doesn't trickle down to the economy in terms of the effect on inflation until months. I mean, they find out, you look back, and I think it was 2008 recession, they went back afterwards and said, well, actually, then this is years later, by 2010, the economists actually got the updated data and said, actually, the first 2 months of the recession were late 2007. No one had any clue.
No, exactly.
Late 2007. There were no numbers in late 2007 that said, oh yes, there's a recession that's already begun. They didn't find this out 2 years later because it's very hard to measure the economy in real time, right? Inflation, obviously you can see it, but your impact as the Federal Reserve is lagged. It's not like the Federal Reserve raises rates tomorrow and suddenly inflation goes down. So the issue is if you wait too long to take an effect, right? And inflation is now rolling at 6, 7, 8. People then begin to change their behavior and push it up. Now you reach the point where even if you raise rates, you still have to go through another 6 to 12 months of high inflation rates.
And the second thing, which we have to remember also, is the reason you raise rates is because there's just too much money chasing too few goods, right? Here's a situation where there's not too much money. Here's the situation where the money that we say there's too much money is coming from a different part, right? In other words, Congress and the Fed have to work together because if the Fed raises rates, but Congress keeps pushing money towards people, it has no impact, right? So they got to work together. You can't be giving money as if nothing's going to happen tomorrow and the Fed raises rates. That's not going to do anything. It's not going to do any good for anybody.
It's counteracting each other, right?
Absolutely.
The point of raising rates is to decrease the money supply, to pull money out.
Pull money out of the system.
But of course, any dollar Congress spends at this point is creation of new money because of the fact that we're in debt. Any new dollar they create is brand new money. It pops out of nowhere because the Federal Reserve has to print it. So if the Federal Reserve is taking money out and Congress is putting money in, it's a net wash. So it doesn't have any effect. And the underlying effect of too few goods is still there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's definitely something I think people need to be thinking about because this changes the way you look at your financial plans. Right? It changes the way you see the future because your expenses in the future are now, instead of saying, if let's say you were bargaining for 2 to 3% inflation, you would expect your expenses in the future to be 3% higher every year. If inflation is now 5 to 6, now your expenses in the future are not just double what you thought they were because of the way compound interest works. Your expenses in the future are more than double what you thought they were going to be. So
the growth is more than double.
The growth is more than double, right? Because of the fact that, in other words, doubling inflation when you compound it results in more than a double change in your total cost at the end. And so it changes the way you think about that and also changes the way you have to approach your investments now because you need to sit there and say, all right, it's one thing to invest in very risky sectors when I think the percent chance of recession is under 10%. It's another thing to invest in very risky sectors when you're saying, I think my chance of recession is now 20 to 30%. Now it's not 1 out of every 10 times, it's 3 out of every 10 times. So you have to change the way you allocate your investments. Say, do I want to be as risky? Maybe I want to be less risky. And look, we never advocate on Today Mañana for cash, right? It's just like you want to be involved in the market.
Exactly. I mean, it's just like if you buy a home, right, in an area where there's never flood, and then you basically downsize or upsize or do whatever, but in an area where there's a flood, now there's a different type of risk, which is basically flood. So you need to have some insurance for that. And so what do? We say, okay, given the fact that our expectation for recession just grew from X to X plus whatever it may be, we need to take a look at the portfolios and say, how do we begin to protect that just in case? It may never happen, but the protection's good. Because if it does happen, you want to make sure you're in a position where people's principles, in particular, are safe. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the goal.
Exactly.
That's always the plan. So that's a little bit of what we're thinking today. Just feel free to, for future shows, you can always ask us any questions, send them our way, let us know what you're thinking. And we will incorporate it. We're always happy to answer some audience questions.
Exactly.
Or bring them up as the show begins. But there's always resiliency, and there's always entrepreneurs.
Always.
Number one.
Well, you got to think positive.
You got to think positive. And
the glass is half full, not half empty.
Exactly. You can still save for retirement and do well. Yes. You don't have to pull all your money out of the market.
No. That'd be the wrong thing to do.
In fact, that's the number one thing not to do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so we'll switch gears a little bit here.
Sure.
And our not so subtle topic shift to two fantastic entrepreneurs that we have with us that are really doing a lot. I think these are going to be some really inspirational and educational businesses that we have here with us. And so we're really happy to be joined by Sheila Lenihan Jordan. She's the owner of Prosper Parenting, as well as Debbie Shoemaker Berkeley. She's the owner of ADAptable Acceptance. Sheila, Debbie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
It's really exciting to have you both on. So I know each of your businesses, deals in different ways with the subject of individuals who have disabilities and how to help them thrive in their lives going forward. And so each of you can feel free to jump in. For each of you, how did you get involved in this field in the first place?
Well, for me, it started probably when I had my own children or when they were in school. So I have two boys. They're not boys anymore. They're young men, 22 and 24. And when they are not on the spectrum, and that's with the course that I took when I got my master's in special education. But when they were young, they really had a propensity to really pay attention to and really enjoy the students in their class that needed some special needs. And that was kind of my inspiration for going that route. And I just kind of decided when I wanted to go and work with children and continue to work with children when they got older that I wanted to focus on autism, ADHD, and anxiety.
So your son's kind of inspired you
Yes.
in a way to get into this field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. Debbie, how about yourself?
One of my first jobs out of college was working at a school out in Keswick, the Oakland School, which was a boarding school that at the time specialized in working with kids with severe learning disabilities and sort of what I would call sort of a neurodiverse population. Kids that had a lot of there were a lot of kids who had autism spectrum disorder and ADHD and other sort of behavioral challenges. And I really loved that job, and that sort of prompted me to go and get my master's in counseling. And but rather than doing more traditional counseling, I really loved working with people with disabilities, individuals with disabilities, and sort of returned to that realm after graduate school. And I worked at Woodrow Wilson Rehab Center in Fishersville for a while for a grant program, and then I worked at the Disability Services Center at University of Virginia for about 15 years, and worked really closely with the population of students with autism spectrum disorder. But really, I guess in the last year or so, decided to start a business where I could sort of focus on providing more individual, customized services to people. And so that's sort of what prompted me to kind of try and strike out on my own. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, we got some audience comments here. Tom Brubaker is giving us a nice big heart. And Kari Maples, I think this is for you, Debbie, is saying, "Are you making your public radio debut today?" Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Here on Today Mañana, your debut. So, tell us a little bit about each of your services, the expertise that you are in each of your businesses.
Yeah, so my focus is on behavior consulting, but also health and wellness coaching, so parent coaching. And my background is in ABA therapy. ABA is applied behavior analysis, and it's a very specific type of therapy that is used with children with autism in particular. Really very effective, and I did that in the clinical setting, school setting, and mostly in a home setting for about 6 years. And it was, again, very effective, but I found that there was kind of a missing piece, or what I felt was a missing piece, in the sense that the parents weren't getting the attention that I felt that they needed, and it was to no fault of that type of therapy. It just can't do everything.
Exactly.
And I felt like every time I, said goodbye to my client and the family, I kept thinking about them, kept thinking about, the mom, what is she going to do tonight? I know she's not going to sleep, whatever it might be. And I really got to thinking about having something that approaches what the parents are going through as well as the child. And my parent coaching focused on teaching the parent how to do and use the strategies that I was using. But it wasn't asking the question, how are you doing, really?
What can you do to help yourself through this process as well?
And I hesitate to use the word self-care because, I do use it sometimes, but when I use that word with a parent, I'll get the typical, I'll get an eye roll, which I totally understand. That does make my eyes roll, like, oh, really? When could I find time for that? That's ridiculous. But so my services are focused on the parent and how their expectations of the child kind of comes from their childhood sometimes, the way they were parented, their own expectations of themselves, of the way they think they should be as a parent, and kind of just looks at that from their angle to try to help, develop those strategies that will help the child in any situation.
So Sheila, let me ask, or either one, let me ask a question. So when it comes to autism, would you say that the autism is similar across the board with children, or is there different types of autism that in some cases the child and the parents need more attention, more help to help each other, and in some cases it's a little easier?
I think autism is really sort of, if you conceptualize it as a spectrum, I think if you meet somebody with autism, you've met one person with autism, so to speak. And so some people, some individuals with autism have much more severe forms of autism and may need lifelong care and have much more challenges. Some people may have higher functioning autism and, be able to achieve independence later on in life. But even people with higher functioning autism still have challenges. Sure. And so those parents who are raising them still may encounter a lot of challenges, throughout that that person's childhood. And I think that's where a lot of the challenge comes in, is where the parents are sort of struggling with how do I, bring the best, am I doing the right thing? Am I, supporting this child in the right way? Am I making the best decisions? And, I think every parent, whether they have, with all of their kids, struggle with those questions. But when a child has, maybe some additional special needs, they struggle with those questions even more.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think that there's so many things that go on with the parents' expectation of themselves and of their child. You have to really think of it so differently than a neurotypical child. That's whether it's in your household or others that And there's the other part of it too that I've seen with parents where when their child gets that diagnosis of autism. There's kind of a little bit of a grief aspect to that. That's I don't find is talked about very much, in the sense that a parent, we all have hopes and dreams for our kids.
Of course.
They may be nothing like what the child has for themselves, but you have kind of this picture in your mind of what you hope for, and that changes completely. And it's hard to show a parent, and you want to give them that hope that there is, there's so much that can be done, but that they have to kind of not dial down their expectations, but just really kind of think of it in a different way, kind of at a different angle.
To change them. I think sometimes we have a tendency as human beings that when our expectations change, we assume that this is in fact a bad thing.
Yeah.
That's something that the new expectations are worse than the old ones, when in reality they're just different than the old ones. And sometimes you come around to that, even in your own life, that you say, oh, I thought this was going to happen and it didn't. This is bad. And then 5 years later you look back and say, actually that was not a bad thing that happened.
Yeah.
my new expectations and the new changes that have happened are in fact better than what I had thought was going to happen years ago. And sometimes I think it is that initial grief of
impact,
saying
yeah.
that which I planned for will not happen. And as human beings, that impacts us negatively at first. And we have to sort of realize that that's not necessarily a negative thing, that our plans have changed.
Right. And you can't fast forward to the hindsight. You wish you could.
Exactly.
But I mean, in my coaching and in the strategies I give to parents, there is a little bit of that in the sense that we try to I can be the third party kind of looking in at the family situation, talk with them about, how even their family system, how they'd like it to work, how it's really working now, may not be very good, but I focus on the positives of that because it's so easy, to just focus on what's not working and what they think they did not do right. And there doesn't have to be a right or wrong, but they can kind of reframe the way that their family's going to operate for a while. And then next thing you know, the child changes everything anyway.
Exactly.
You just move into the next phase. Yeah.
Exactly. No, I know, Debbie, you also work with both children, also with physical disabilities as well. Is that correct?
Correct. The population that I work with is a little bit broader, to include physical disabilities, chronic illnesses, traumatic brain injuries. And I think my business kind of complements Sheila's because she's really kind of focused more on parents and families with maybe younger kids, whereas I'm really focused on individuals who are sort of in transitioning. So adolescents and young adults who are sort of at that crossroads of, getting ready to finish high school and move on to the next step in their lives, whether that's college, or whether they're thinking about moving into the workforce. They may have a vocational goal. It could be individuals who are in college and maybe moving on to grad school or moving into the workforce. But there are a lot of questions and a lot of considerations that go along with those transitions. A lot of students or a lot of individuals who sort of may need accommodations or who may need additional support in terms of navigating where am I going to live and how do I work with landlords on making sure that my apartment's accessible? Or how do I work with employers in terms of negotiating accommodations? I think a lot of people are really afraid to have that conversation because they think that they're going to have to ask for things that are really big and really expensive, and that's not always the case. And so there are ways to have those conversations with employers that can kind of honor their own needs and their own rights without scaring employers away. There are ways to sort of ask for needs, as you're making the transition to college without feeling like you're asking. I think people feel like they're asking for too much sometimes, and that's not necessarily the case. It's kind of finding the language to express what your accommodation needs may be and what they may look like without feeling like you're asking for too much. And I think a lot of people feel like they're asking for too much when they're really just expressing, their ADA rights, really.
Right.
And then the other piece of it is just, providing coaching for individuals who may have neurodiverse conditions as they make those transitions, that step into adulthood. So
That's interesting because, in reality, to a certain respect, think about when you leave college and go into the workforce, right? Everybody needs somebody behind you to say, no, you're good enough. No, don't worry about this. That's not important. What's important is the fact that you bring this to the table. So with somebody with already some difficulties, right, to be able to coach them and say, you bring something to the table here that they're looking for. So what you're asking for is not too much, because what you have is what they want. And so if they have to say, oh yeah, that's not a problem, if you need this or you need that other service, that's not a problem, because what you're bringing to the table is important to them.
Well,
and I
your
think
success will then fuel their success.
that's
as
right,
well.
exactly. And so sometimes they just have to be mentored and coached into that sense that, hey, yes, I mean, I'm important and I know what I'm doing will benefit this company, and so whatever little I'm asking for is not too much, and I'm sure it's difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, there's a lot of myth kind of surrounding, if I disclose or if I ask for an accommodation that, that door's going to slam shut,
Right.
Or that, just saying the word accommodation, it's going to sort of end the conversation before it even begins, and helping individuals to sort of understand what their accommodation needs are and how to express them and how to word them to employers in a way that, oh, well, yeah, now that we're talking about this actually doesn't sound that crazy,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It gets people, feeling more comfortable.
Exactly. Yeah. Would you say that the fact that more people are working from home, is that benefit to most of these people now?
I think more in my population with the younger children. I mean, it could go either way, but
Right.
I mean, when a lot of families initially, at least in the pandemic, lost their services, that whether their child was getting somebody who came in home, who wasn't able
Right,
to come
right,
in home
exactly.
anymore, or the child, if he or she was in school, if they weren't going, trying to work remotely and things like that while your child is in the home, that was a struggle. So I
Sure.
think, luckily we're seeing a little bit of improvement with that.
Sure.
But yeah, you probably find the same thing.
Yeah, I think it depends on the individual, and I think it depends on the disability. I think for people who have, for example, chronic medical conditions, the option to work from home has been kind of a godsend. But there are people, say, with ADHD or other neurodiverse conditions, where being in the office is, a much better
Right.
fit for them.
More of an outlet.
There's more, exactly, yeah. And there's more people around them, and there's more activity, and yeah.
Right. And just being on Zoom just hasn't been ideal.
Exactly.
So, it absolutely depends on the individual.
Yeah.
So,
It does. It sounds like a lot of what both of you do is almost really, it's almost completely customized with each new person,
Yeah.
because each person is completely unique in what their needs are going to be and what their advantages, what they're going to be good at. And you almost have to, there's no one size fits all
Exactly.
approach. I mean, there's the experiences, the degrees, and the knowledge you both have that filters through, but it's not like you can replicate, yes, I can do the exact same thing with every single one of these people.
exactly.
Right.
There's not a one size fits all
Exactly.
set of, accommodations or, like really any kind of coaching or for that goes along. There could be two people who have like the same disability on paper, and their needs and their what they need in terms of support could be completely different. So
Yeah, and parents, I know for me, that I definitely don't have a one size fits all, because they have very similar issues, and it's great when I can have some parents talk with each other and kind of they get it when they talk about the issues that they have. So there's certainly similarities, but you always, everybody comes to the table with, like I said, their own expectations, their own hope. And unfortunately, some of them just, if they're making a kind of a comparison about one child to the other, even within their home, am I doing the right thing for this one or that one? It really is very tailored to the child, and then that's ever changing because their developmental needs, of course, change pretty quickly as well.
As they get,
Yeah.
as their age changes, they get older, they need different things.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Just
Yes.
so much that goes into it. I'm curious from the entrepreneur perspective, like how did you come, each of you, to say, all right, this is ready to take this to be something that I do as a living, as a business, and how have you sort of navigated being a small business owner while also providing these services?
Well, I think, part of me thinks at this particular time in our history, like, is it a good time to start a business or a terrible time? I guess that remains to be seen. But
It also depends on the person.
yes. But I just felt like having seen those needs with the parents and, seeing how quickly things can shift. We all went from one day to the next of everything that was chugging along the way we had it, was gone. So there's that unpredictability. The parents that I work with, parents of children with special needs, they live in that, uncertainty all the time.
Right.
So I think that just kind of, working with that, having that work for me as a business owner in terms of saying, hey, I get it. Like, I can help you navigate your child and your family system as it's changing daily a lot of times. Sometimes hourly.
Yep.
So I think it's to an advantage, to kind of just say, have that flexibility for me. And as I said, to be able to, work with a parent on some of those issues that I wasn't able to when I was working for somebody else. Again, not because that was not a good service, it was just that piece of it I really want to focus on the parent.
So you have the flexibility of being an entrepreneur and being able to be nimble, to shift and serve exactly the way that you need and that you want to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What about you, Debbie?
I think that what I was kind of realizing and noticing is that a lot of, I was only accessible when I was working in disability services. I was only accessible to individuals who had gained acceptance to the university that I was working at. And as I was looking at other businesses, that offered this type of service or some semblance of this type of service, it was a very boutique, like, hey, we have these $10,000 packages or these $5,000 packages. And so it was really only accessible to a very small portion of the population. And so, which was also true of, working in a disability services office. And so I really wanted to offer something to a broader portion of the population that didn't necessarily have access to these services, in a much more affordable way. As far as running a business, I don't have a business background. I'm kind of learning as I go along. My friend, my very close friend who has started a new job in a completely different industry has sort of used the phrase, it's like changing the tires on a car while it's rolling down the hill.
Downhill, wow.
And, I relate to that. So that part of it is, I haven't been put in prison for, tax fraud or anything like that yet, but I'm trying to kind of keep my eye on doing all of this legally and above board, and SCORE has been a wonderful resource.
Yeah.
They've been amazing, and I've had amazing friends and supports.
Yeah, we get together every couple of weeks to just bounce ideas off each other, and hey, what about this? Or how do you work? How do you fix your website? Or
Right,
what?
exactly.
Exactly.
Boss Babes Charlottesville has been another amazing resource where I can sort of get help. So that piece of it, I'm learning as I go along. But that's my goal, is to be able to have this to be a resource for, my clients. And it's not necessarily that I'm looking to become like, a mogul, so.
What the advantages that being a small business owner brings you, the flexibility of the broader client base, exactly.
Right.
And then the price is just to change those tires as you're rolling
Right,
down the hill.
right. I'm not looking to one day, light cigars using like $1,000 bills or whatever. So.
We have more modest dreams than that.
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, before I let you both go, where can people find you, contact you, get in touch with you?
Well, my website is www.prosperparenting.com. If they log in there, everything is on there. Parents can have the option of just scheduling a call. If they can I do a 30-minute call, just a discovery call with clients, and we just chat about what they think their needs might be. Sometimes they don't even exactly know. So they can book a call, email me there as well, and we kind of take it from there.
Awesome. And how about you, Debbie?
My website is ADAacceptance.com, and that's all just one word. And I have like a little form that you can fill out that goes directly to my email address. You can also email me directly. That's on my website. And I also have a phone number on my website that you can call or text.
Fantastic. Yep. So prosperparenting.com, ADAacceptance.com. You can find both of these fantastic entrepreneurs and really just the great things. Really appreciate what you both are doing. It's a wonderful service for a community. And so thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's great. It's we sit here every single week and we meet new people with certain dreams and certain passions, and they provide certain services. And and I always say it's being your own boss and your own entrepreneur and having your own business is great because you can do what you really love to do, but the chassis, meaning everything else that goes in business, you also have to do, and you go, oh my Lord, how do I do this and how do I do that? So it's a challenge because just when you finish doing your work, now you got to go home and say, now I got to do this other work because I got this business to run. So I take my hats off to all entrepreneurs, right? Because I know how hard they work.
They're doing two jobs essentially.
Exactly.
Doing the thing that you actually do, that your business is about,
that
and
which you
all the
love
things
to
behind
do.
the
Yes.
scenes to make it work.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is.
A lot of work. So I know we have a couple announcements before we close out. Craft CVille, who we had on Jackie Slusher and Megan Watson from Craft CVille a few weeks ago.
Right.
This Saturday, October 23rd, the market is going to be at Stonefield from 11 a.m. to 4
I knew
p.m.
that. I knew that.
You knew that because you are going.
That's right.
So you can find lots of local artisans. I think there's some food there. So it's great. It's free to attend the craft fair, and so you can go around and see a lot of the local artists that they have put together at Craft CVille this Saturday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Stonefield.
Beautiful.
So be sure to check that out. Next week, some more fantastic guests. We're going to have Carolina Obando of Carolina Obando Beauty. So she makes beauty products.
Another Carolina.
And another Carolina. And as well as Stephanie Devada from CVille Picnic will be back.
Okay.
She'll be joining us along with Glenthorne Farms, one of the beautiful locations where she does her picnics. So they're going to come on and talk about some of the things they do, some of the things she does at CVille Picnic to make those beautiful experiences, as well as what Glenthorne Farms is like. And great. The views and the amenities that they have up there. So that'll be another fun time.
Absolutely.
On the show. And don't forget our Latino Roundtable on November 4th. Putting together some great guests that we've had on the show.
Latina, right?
Latina.
Oh, you did?
Roundtable.
I thought her Latina.
Latina Roundtable.
Latina.
Yeah, all three Latinas.
Yeah.
All three Latinas.
Okay.
We'll be the only two Latinos.
That's right.
Everyone else will be Latina on the show.
That should be a lot of fun.
So that'll be a blast as well. So be sure not to miss that on Thursday, November 4th on Today Mañana. As always, love being here on the set with you. Just really appreciate all our sponsors that make this possible. Emergent Financial Services, as well as Vitae Spirits, GBS Financial Services, Cristel Noel State Farm Agency, CVille Picnic, and Forward Adelante, the premier Latino networking group here in Charlottesville. Forward Adelante is our charity for this week. We've been supporting nonprofits on each week of the show. So this week it is Forward Adelante. It is a 501c3 nonprofit.
That's right.
We're to put a lot of networking events specifically tailored to Latino entrepreneurs, Latino professionals here in the community. Forward Adelante, of course, helps out with the show, with Today Mañana. They're one of the backers of Today Mañana. So if you'd love to support Forward Adelante, I think Nick has put forwardadelante.org into the feed. Forwardvirginia.com will also take you there, but it's also forwardadelante.org. Again, if Adelante is trouble, forwardvirginia.com redirects you to the same place. And so be sure to check it out. You can donate to Forward Adelante there. It's a great 501c3 nonprofit that's here,
It certainly
here
is.
in Charlottesville.
We
There's
help a lot of people, that's
great
right.
work. And as we come out of the pandemic, you can expect to see a lot more of those beautiful in-person Forward Adelante events with our cultural spotlights and highlighting Latinos that, Latino and Latina guitarists, musicians, doing the spotlight, the food, the hugging, the networking, the getting in touch. Those will be coming out as we go into the new year.
Looking forward to that.
Looking forward to that.
Especially the hugging.
Very much.
All
Especially the hugging.
Latinos love to hug.
Latino networking group
we kind of
without
missed. We've been
hugging.
hugging air lately.
Exactly. So be sure to, if you can, to support the great work at Forward Adelante. They're our charity, our nonprofit for this week. And just thank you, the audience, as always, for coming out to join us. Really appreciate it. Be sure to send us any questions, like and share today's show, especially with people you think that should use these services, whether parents or individuals who are
That's right.
ready to take that next phase of their life as individuals having a thriving life with disabilities. And so just be sure to check it out, share, like, and tell everyone you know about today's show. And be sure to join us next week. But until that time, really appreciate you watching us, and we will see you hasta mañana.